All right, everybody, today I'm coming at you with a little bit of a different type of video, or something different for what we do on the channel. Aside from my preview, predictions, and breakdown of the entire UFC 292 card, which is up on the channel already if you haven't checked that out, I'll put a link to that video, in the description of this video. But what I'm going to be doing today is going down my final betting insights and the best ways, or most profitable ways, in my opinion, to attack each fight on the card, or at least my favorite fights on the card from a betting perspective. Obviously, this isn't financial advice. You all know that if you know how these videos work. But we're going to be going through, how many fights on the card? I think 10? We're going to be going through 11 out of 12 fights. I'm not going to talk about the Brad Katona and Cody Gibson fight, just because I didn't watch a lot of The Ultimate Fighter, and I just feel like I wouldn't be able to give that much of an insight into how to break that fight down, at least when it comes to the betting side. But we are going to go through every other fight on the card, and we're just going to get it started. So let's see how this goes. And if you guys like this video, don't forget to hit a spinning back elbow on the like button and a front snap kick to the jaw on the subscribe button, and then maybe lock up that notification bell in that leg lock to get the quick tap, so you can tap on the notification bell for all future uploads. All right, we're going to kick it off with the first fight of the night with Karine Silva at -155 on the money line, and all these odds are subject to change. They are on DraftKings Sportsbook, and that's where I got all my information. Karine Silva -155 versus Marina Moroz at a +130. My favorite bet on the fight is actually the under 2.5 rounds. I don't see this fight going to decision. I see a lot of people on the Marina Moroz side in terms of a bet. They like her as an underdog, and I understand why. You know, she's a durable fighter. She beat Karine Silva back in the day. I think it was about maybe 5-6 years ago, maybe longer than that. And that's the reason why I don't take too much stock in that first fight, because I feel like both girls have improved in leaps and bounds in their game. But Moroz has a good striking game. She has good ability to use her range and distance on the feet. And if she's on the ground, she's a good scrambler. She doesn't put herself in a lot of submission danger or a lot of sweep danger. She's very good from the top position. She can attack on the ground with submissions and ground and pound. And she's very strong in her own right. But I just think this is a fight that Karine Silva wins. But either way, I don't see the fight going the distance. I think if it does go the distance, it would more lean towards Marina Moroz getting that win via decision. But my favorite lean is actually the under 2.5 rounds at a +100. I think Silva's legit. I think Silva has very technical striking, very solid power, good submission upside, good submission ability to finish the fight. I mean, she's got a lot of first round finishes in her UFC career, and I could honestly see a first round submission or a TKO from Karine Silva in this fight as well. I would more lean towards Silva getting the submission, but I like the under 2.5 rounds at a +100, pretty much even money in terms of my favorite bet or favorite lean to bet on this fight. And then aside from that, I like Karine Silva to win inside the distance by KO or sub. That is sitting at a +150. So plus money on both the leans for the first fight, but I do like the under 2.5. I don't think it sees the scorecards. I think Karine Silva makes a statement here against Moroz, and if you want a little bit juicier of a number, if you're, very confident on the side of Silva like myself, I like Karine Silva inside the distance at a +150. All right, up next, we're going to talk about Andrea KGB Lee taking on Natalia Silva. Now, this is a fight that's going to have a lot juicier line if you're looking to side with the underdog in Andrea KGB Lee. She's obviously fought the better competition. She's fought the tougher girls. She arguably could have won that decision against Macy Barber, but the judges went the other way and gave it to Macy, who seems to have been gifted a lot of decisions in her MMA career, or at least in her UFC career. But when it comes to the side of Natalia Silva, she's -310. I don't think it should be that high, but I think it was a lot higher originally. I think she was closer to like a -400 on the money line, so it looks like money has been coming in on the underdog in Andrea KGB Lee since the fight opened. If you're on the side of Andrea Lee, which I am not, I am heavily on the side of Natalia Silva, you would probably want to play Andrea Lee by decision, which is at a very, very good number at a +380. So if you're on that side, I think that's the best way to target the fight from a betting perspective is Lee by decision. I just don't think she knocks out Natalia Silva, and I don't think she gets her in any form of trouble on the ground, or at least even if she does, I think that Silva will be able to fend off the submission attempts. My favorite bet, however, is the under 2.5 rounds again at plus 160. I think that this is a very solid line. I think Natalia Silva is such a finisher, whether it's with her hands on the feet or with her submissions and ability to wrap up the opponent's neck or lock up an arm or a leg with her superior Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu game. Silva is going to be hunting for the finish from the minute the fight starts to the minute that it ends. She's a very aggressive fighter, and although Andrea Lee is a fighter who hasn't been finished in her UFC career, I still think that you want to hunt that under 2.5, and I think you want to hunt Natalia Silva inside the distance. I think that Natalia Silva is the real deal. I think Natalia Silva is going to find a way to submit Andrea Lee. I could see her stunning her with a big shot on the feet, rocking her, and then locking up her neck in a guillotine, but I like Silva inside the distance at a plus 175. Like I said, if you're on the side of Andrea Lee, you probably want to play Lee by decision at plus 380, but my favorite bet overall in terms of the fight is the under 2.5 rounds at a plus 160. All right, up next, Andre Petroski versus Gerald GM3 Meerschaert. This fight is one that I think is pretty tricky in terms of a bet, but I'm very, very confident in the side that I'm siding with. Petroski comes into the fight minus 225, GM3 plus 185. I like the Petroski side here, and I like Petroski on the money line. I'm not super confident in him getting a KO or a submission, but I feel like when GM3 loses, for the most part, aside from the fight with Krzysztof Jotko, it is him getting knocked out, or he has been submitted in his career before he got into the UFC. I'm not so certain he's been submitted inside the UFC, but you can correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section. But I am leaning with Petroski, and I broke it down on my podcast, which I will put a link to in the description. I just think Petroski is so much better from a technical positioning spot on the floor with his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. GM3 is always going to be live for that Hail Mary submission. You know, he did drop Bruno Silva, who went life and death with Alex Poatan Pereira, so you do have to take that into consideration. He did drop him with a big left hand and then submit him in that fight, but I'm not on the side of GM3 here. If you are, again, you would want to take GM3 by submission, and that is sitting at a plus 350 on DraftKings, but my favorite lean for the fight is actually just the Petroski money line, which is minus 225. I do think he has the ability to knock out GM3 on the feet. He's got a really good 3-2, a right hook into a straight left hand. He's got a good 1-2 down the middle. He's got a good cross into a lead hook. He's got decent body kicks, and he has a lot of power. The one thing you do have to worry about on his side, though, is the gas tank when it gets past that midway point of the second round and into the third. Even though we've seen him slow down in the second round, pushing the heavy grappling, pushing the heavy wrestling, looking for subs, you know, getting that top control and accruing top control time, and then come back in the third round when it looks like he was dead tired and be able to push that pace, be aggressive, look to finish the fight, and look to get a submission. I do like Petroski inside the distance as well. Like I said, my favorite lean for the fight is Petroski on the money line because I think there is a chance this does go to decision, but that would be at a minus 110, or I'm sorry, minus 225. Petroski inside the distance is at a minus 110. I think that's a decent fight, or a decent line to look when you break down the fight and attacking it from a perspective in terms of betting if you're on the Petroski side, but I also think a sneaky prop is actually Petroski by TKO. We've seen Gerald Meerschaert, he doesn't have the best striking defense, he's not super fast on the feet, and he's actually pretty awkward in terms of his upper trunk movement, his head movement, and his striking defense, and Petroski does have power, he does have decent boxing, decent kicking. I think there is a possibility that he finds the chin of GM3 and TKOs him, or maybe drops him with a big shot, jumps on top of him, gets to the full mount, and gets a ground and pound TKO. I think Petroski by TKO is a decent way to look at this fight in terms of a betting perspective, and it's at a juicy plus 275. And then if you're on the side of GM3, you always want to take GM3 by sub, which again is at a juicy number of a plus 350, but keep in mind that he is fighting a much more technical grappler than he's ever faced in his entire UFC career, and I think that is something that everybody has to take into consideration. I see a lot of people on the GM3 side, I see a lot of people on the late third round, late second round finishes, or GM3 by sub, GM3 in round 3. GM3 in round 3 is always a decent look, but I just don't think Meerschaert has much left in the tank at this point, and I think he's facing the most decorated and technical grappler that he's ever faced in his career in terms of a submission and positioning upside. A lot of the times if GM3 gets those subs, it's against people who he has a very, very high level advantage against when it hits the floor. Petroski's not that guy, so that's why I like Petroski on the money line as my favorite bet, and then Petroski inside the distance at -110, or Petroski by a TKO at a +275. But again, if you're on the side of GM3, it's always going to be GM3 by submission, which is at a +350. All right, up next, we move to the next fight up. Austin Hubbard, -180 versus Kurt Holobaugh at +145, one half of the Ultimate Fighter finale. I didn't do too much research on this fight, so this is one I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on, but I actually do like the under 2.5 rounds here. I think everybody's expecting this fight to not go, or to go to a decision, because Austin Hubbard isn't much of a finisher. He's a grappler. He's going to grind you out. He's going to look to push you up against the cage, look to slow you down, build up that lactic acid, build up top control and ground and pound time, and eventually win that fight via decision. But you have to look on the side of Kurt Holobaugh. Holobaugh's a guy who was in the UFC before, but never was able to get a UFC win under his belt. And I think when you have a guy who's coming off that Ultimate Fighter, who's going for the Ultimate Fighter finale win, who is a tough, durable veteran in the game, I think he's going to be very hungry to get that inside the distance finish, which is going to leave him open for a submission or a ground and pound TKO on the side of Hubbard. So even though a lot of people are on the over 2.5 rounds in this fight, I actually like the under 2.5 at a +130, because I feel like it's one of those things where everybody's expecting it to go the distance, and usually when you do that, it ends up going the other direction. You have a very hungry, capable vet looking for a finish in his UFC career, and the first win of his UFC career in Kurt Holobaugh. We saw his boxing, his combinations, his shots to the body, his work up top, the ability to mix up between high and low level, ripping body, coming back up top to the head. His boxing and striking was very clean when he got into this Ultimate Fighter finale fight against Hubbard, and I think Hubbard is going to be there to get hit, and he is going to be there to get caught by the boxing. My money line lean is actually on the underdog in Kurt Holobaugh. I think he's just a little bit more technical than Austin Hubbard when it comes to the striking, and I think he can outstrike and piece up Hubbard on the feet. I like actually the look at Holobaugh by KO, TKO, or DQ at a +450. I think if Holobaugh wins this fight, it's going to be with the boxing, it's going to be with the distance striking, it's going to be with the in-close striking and the technical striking that he showcases, more than likely with his boxing, less than his kickboxing. So I do like actually Holobaugh by KO, TKO, or DQ, and maybe it's because Hubbard has never been a guy who's really impressed me even before he was on the Ultimate Fighter. Back when he was in the UFC, I was never a big fan of Hubbard. I just never felt like he pushed for that finish or looked to get that finish inside the octagon. And I think you have two fighters in this Ultimate Fighter finale who are going to be coming forward and looking for that finish. I do think Holobaugh gets the job done as a +145, but my favorite bet would probably be the under 2.5 rounds at +130, followed by Holobaugh on the money line at +145. And then if you're looking at a juicy prop, I would say Holobaugh by KO, TKO, because I just see a big striking advantage in terms of offense and defense, and I think the hand speed and technical ability with the boxing might be a little bit too much for Hubbard, who does get hit when he gets into those striking exchanges. And again, that is at a +450 for Holobaugh by KO or TKO. All right, next up, we're going to move to the next fight up with Gregory Rodrigues at -355, going up against Dennis TIULIULIN, who is sitting at a juicy +280. If you go back and look at my pre-fight predictions and my breakdown, I am actually siding with Dennis TIULIULIN in this fight. I don't like the durability issues. I don't like the ability of Gregory Rodrigues to just want to get into those wars, walk the opponent down. He always gets cracked. He always gets hurt. In his last fight, he got dropped with a brutal switch stance left hand, I believe, from Bruno Ferreira, who was very heavily underestimated in that fight and got knocked out clean with one shot. The biggest advantage for Rodrigues in this fight, in my opinion, is his grappling, his jiu-jitsu, and his submission ability, but we don't really see him use that too much in his MMA career, especially inside the UFC. My favorite favorite bet for the fight is actually going to be Denis Tiuliulin on the money line at a plus 280. I know Rodriguez is tough. I know he's had a lot of success outside of the UFC. I know he had a lot of hype inside the UFC. He's got some impressive wins in his career as well. But I think with the durability issues and with the guy in Tiuliulin who has a 90% win rate via KO or TKO going up against a guy in Rodriguez who also has knockout power but loves to slug it out, I think that the technical ability edge goes slightly to Tiuliulin, and against a guy who likes to get into those wars and likes to strike it out on the feet, I'm actually leaning Tiuliulin on the money line at plus 280 as my favorite bet for the fight. But when it comes to a prop side, I actually have a few different looks for this fight. I'll start off with the Rodriguez side. If you're on the Rodriguez side, I expect him to win this fight if he uses his wrestling, his jiu-jitsu, his top control. And at that point, I would look at Rodriguez by submission, which I think before was at plus 270. Now it's at a plus 225. I think Rodriguez by submission is the best look if you're on the Rodriguez side, because I do expect him to exploit the grappling, the defensive grappling, the wrestling, and the jiu-jitsu deficiencies in terms of defense on the side of Tiuliulin, who we've seen get taken down and submitted before against a highly decorated Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I believe he's a black belt in Gregory Rodriguez, so I think Rodriguez by submission at plus 225 is my favorite look on the Rodriguez side, and my favorite look for Denis Tiuliulin is Tiuliulin by KO or TKO. Like I said, 90% of his wins come by way of knockout in his mixed martial arts career. He's 1-2 in his UFC career, looking to tie it up at 2-2. This is a must-win situation for both guys, but I feel like it's more of a must-win for the Tiuliulin side. And for Tiuliulin to win by knockout, TKO, or DQ is sitting at a plus 400 on the DraftKings. If you're on Tiuliulin, I think the money line is just a better bet at plus 280. I think if you're on the Rodriguez side, you look at Rodriguez by submission at plus 225. If you want to push your luck with Tiuliulin, I don't think he wins by sub. I don't think he wins via decision because I don't see this fight going the distance. So I would push your luck with the Tiuliulin by knockout at plus 400. If you want to do the alternative method of victory double chance, I think Rodriguez by submission or Tiuliulin by knockout, it's currently at a minus 105 on DraftKings, and I really like that line if you're not too certain which direction you want to go, because like I said, I think Rodriguez wins this fight by instilling his wrestling, using his grappling, his top control, and looking to submit Tiuliulin, who's had issues in that realm before. And I think if Tiuliulin wins, it's him getting into a striking exchange with Rodriguez and being able to exploit the defensive inefficiencies of Rodriguez when it comes to the striking and his durability issues. So Rodriguez by sub or Tiuliulin by knockout for the alternative method of victory double chance at minus 105. But my favorite bet is probably Tiuliulin on the money line at plus 280 or Rodriguez by submission at plus 225 if you are on the opposite side. But my main pick is going to be Denis Tiuliulin by knockout in this fight, but I like the money line the best. All right, and we move on to the next fight in the middleweight division between Chris, the All-American Weidman, and Brad Tavares. Oh, excuse me, guys. So looking at this fight, Chris Weidman, a pretty big underdog. I can see why he's the underdog, though, and I think people just don't want to play Brad Tavares because they feel like he's overpriced, and he kind of is, but against a guy like Weidman, although he is a former champion, he's coming off of that vicious leg break against Uriah Hall. He's coming in at 40 years old. I think he's 39 or 40. Plus 210, minus 258 for Tavares. I don't love the money line. I don't think that Tavares should be priced that high, but I wouldn't be mad at Tavares being priced at like minus 210 or minus 220. I think people are looking at the Chris Weidman of old and not looking at the Chris Weidman of current. And look, Brad Tavares hasn't looked that great either. He did go to decision with Israel Adesanya. He went to decision with Dricus du Plessis. He hurt Dricus du Plessis early, and you saw what Dricus du Plessis just did to Robert Whittaker. So Tavares going the distance with him is actually a very good feather in his cap, and I think that people need to go back and watch that fight. Did he get pieced up? Did he get hit a lot? Did he get hurt? Did he get dropped? Yes, he did, but Tavares hurt du Plessis early. He has very good counters, slip and rips off the center line, good ability to move his head, come back with a 2-3, come back with a 2 rip to the body, 2 hook, jab, hook, cross, 1-2 down the middle, has good low kicks, good ability to mix up his kickboxing. He did get knocked out by Bruno Silva with a big shot, which is something I wasn't expecting, but if anybody was going to get the knockout early in that fight, I think it was going to be the Silva side more than the Tavares side. But when it comes to this fight, I think my favorite bet is actually the under 2.5 rounds. If there is that chance that Chris Weidman comes back rejuvenated, looking better than he ever did, I think he has the ability to catch Tavares on the chin with his boxing. We've seen him box up fighters like Jacare Souza, even though he did lose that fight later on. We've seen him use his wrestling and still his grappling, have slick Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I mean, he was able to take down the multiple-time Olympic champion, or at least Olympic wrestler in Yoel Romero. He took him down pretty easily, actually, before he got flying kneed into the stratosphere. We've seen him take down Kelvin Gastelum and Samit Gastelum. We saw him take down Omari Akhmadov. Brad Tavares defeated Akhmadov as well. I think he defeated him via decision. Weidman won that fight via decision as well, but by using his wrestling, top control, but also got taken down by Akhmadov in that fight as well. So that is something you have to look at. I just don't like the layoff. I don't like Weidman coming back in off an injury. I don't like the age. I don't like the durability issues. I do think Weidman has finishing upside by submission or by knockout because his boxing is pretty clean, but I think the speed advantage and the technical advantage, I feel like the fighter who has more left in the tank at this point is Tavares. So my favorite bet is going to be the under 2.5 rounds at a -120. I don't see this fight going to decision. I think a lot of people are expecting Tavares to win this fight, or if he does win this fight, he wins it by decision, outpointing, cruising his way around the octagon with good footwork, lateral movement, and good counters, good low kicks when they're at a distance. But I think either way, somebody's going to get finished. It's either going to be Tavares getting clipped with a big shot by Weidman and knocked out, or him getting taken down, ground and pounded, and submitted by Weidman, who's a very decorated Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, or it's going to be Brad Tavares, you know, being able to catch Weidman on the chin and expose the durability issues again and hurting him, knocking him out. I think Tavares by knockout is actually a good look as well, which sits at a +130 on DraftKings under method of victory. But my favorite bet is under 2.5 at -120. I don't think it goes the distance. I also think the fight to end by knockout or TKO sits at a -110, so pretty much even money. I think that's a good way to look on either side, whether you're on the Weidman or the Tavares side, but this isn't a fight where I would tell anybody or advocate anybody to bet on Chris Weidman at this point in his career. I know he was a former champion, but coming off that injury, you know, having durability issues, not looking like his cardio can push that pace even before he got injured in the Uriah Hall fight, I think that, you know, Weidman is a pass for me, but under 2.5 at -120, like I said, I think this fight does finish inside the distance, but I am leaning Tavares to be able to outbox Weidman and hurt him on the chin and eventually knock him out. So I like Tavares by KO or TKO at +130. I like the under 2.5 as my favorite bet, probably at a -120, or the fight to end by KO or TKO at -110 on DraftKings, but the official pick is going to be Brad Tavares by TKO. Up next, we're looking at Marlon Chito Vera going up against Pedro, the young Punisher Munhoz. Vera's sitting at -198 on the money line. Pedro Munhoz, the underdog, +164. Almost a 2-to-1 favorite for Marlon Vera. I think the line makes sense, but I'm going to lean with the underdog here in Pedro Munhoz, and you can listen to a deeper dive and breakdown on my podcast, which I'll link in the description. I just think Munhoz is tailor-made to win a 3-round fight against Vera. Vera loses most of the rounds. He just ends up landing the bigger damage, scoring a knockdown, or catching the opponent with a big shot that cuts him or rocks him. Or rocks them, but against a fighter in Pedro Munhoz, that's not a guy who's ever been knocked down in the UFC. He's not a guy who's been finished in the UFC, and although Vera is going to have the reach, he's going to have the range, he's going to have better attacks from range with the front kicks, you know, the crescent kicks, the side kicks. I don't think he's going to be able to knock out a fighter in Pedro Munhoz. I think he could cut him, so maybe he wins the rounds based on damage, but I love the boxing. I like the showing we saw with Munhoz against Chris Gutierrez, where I actually faded Munhoz and played the heavy favorite in Gutierrez. I like the ability for him to, switch stances, land big punches with his boxing. He's got very good boxing, very good fighting in the pocket, but he also has very, very solid Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and submission upside, which we don't see him use much unless it's in a defensive aspect. Marlon Vera has good submissions. He has good grappling as well, but I think if anybody's going to out-grapple the opponent or look to set up submissions and look to finish the fight, it's going to come from the side of Pedro Munhoz. So my favorite bet is actually the underdog at Pedro Munhoz on the money line. I just don't like Cheeto's reliance on having to land big shots or knockdowns to sway rounds when he usually gets outstruck or outpointed. I think Munhoz is going to be landing bigger shots. He's going to be landing more shots, and that's kind of how I see the fight playing out. But I do actually like Pedro Munhoz via decision, which is sitting at a plus 225. I expect the fight to go the distance. I don't think anybody gets finished, and if it goes to decision, I would say Munhoz probably lands more volume and probably outpoints Marlon Vera, using his low kicks, using his boxing, using those combinations with his hands to steal the rounds, landing the bigger shots. So I like Munhoz via decision at plus 225. I also like the look on Munhoz via a split or majority decision, which is currently at a plus 900. This fight is going to be close. I could see this going to a split decision because I think, like I said, I think the rounds will be close, but I just think Munhoz is going to edge it out. But I think Munhoz via split or majority decision at a plus 900 is a good look and a juicy price tag against a fighter who most of the time is going to go to a split decision in Marlon Chito Vera unless he finishes the opponent, and I don't see him being able to finish a guy like Munhoz. So Munhoz to win via split or majority decision at plus 900 is another good look, but if you're not sure on which side is going to win and you don't want to pick a side between Vera as the favorite or Munhoz as the underdog, you can bet on the fight to be won by a split or majority decision, because I think even if it does go to decision, I think it will be a split decision, and that's at a plus 350. I actually think, besides the Munhoz money line, my favorite bet besides that would actually be the fight to be won by a split or majority decision at plus 350. I think that's a really solid price tag with fighters who most of the time are going to go to that split decision or getting a majority decision more on the side of Marlon Vera than on the side of Pedro Munhoz. But my pick is Pedro Munhoz to win via decision. My favorite bet is Munhoz on the money line, followed up by the fight to be won by a split or majority decision at plus 350, then Munhoz via split or majority decision at plus 900. Up next, we're going to look at the fight between the fighter who just fought last weekend and scored another twister in the UFC, in Damon Blackshear, who's coming in as the plus 185 underdog, going up against Mario Bautista at a minus 225. Bautista was in camp. He was looking to fight Cody No Love Garbrandt on this card. That was a fight where I was heavily leaning the side of Bautista with his grappling, with his ability to pass the guard, get into mount, look to lock up rear naked chokes from the back, look to go for triangles, look to go for triangle arm bars, switching submissions, his ability to flow from position to position on the floor. The kid's jiu-jitsu is phenomenal. His boxing is very good as well. He has good technique, good ability to land low kicks, good stance-changing combinations, but the grappling, submissions, and jiu-jitsu is where this kid, that's where his bread and butter is. And I actually lean Damon Blackshear on the money line as my favorite play. I think Bautista wins the fight. Honestly, I do. I think the short notice aspect, even though you have to take into consideration as well, Blackshear was in fight camp going into that Jose Johnson fight. He stepped in, defeated Jose Johnson via twister. He was getting ready for a fight. So even though he didn't have a fight camp, and this is on short notice, he just fought last week, didn't take any damage. So I honestly think that fight camp and everything in between that doesn't really play too much of a factor here. And Blackshear is a good wrestler. He has good jiu-jitsu in his own right, and I could see him locking up a sub on Mario Bautista. So I would actually lean Damon Blackshear on the money line at a plus 185 for having to attack it from a betting perspective, but this is a fight that I don't really like from either side. I do lean Bautista to win the fight, but I just think the odds on the Blackshear side are decent for you to take a stab at because he is a solid wrestler, a very good jiu-jitsu artist, good from the top position, good with the jiu-jitsu, and his striking has been improving. I think this is going to be a very close fight. I could see Bautista getting a sub against Blackshear. I could see the fight ending inside the distance. This is a fight that has a lot of question marks, but it's a very competitive fight in my opinion, and I don't think the odds at minus 225 are insane, but I do think it's a little bit too high on the Bautista side, so I think I do actually like Damon Blackshear as my favorite bet. And then I would also look, if the prop comes out before Saturday, the fight to end via submission. If that's anywhere near plus money, I think I would take that, because I think either way this fight ends, if it ends inside the distance, I think it's one of these fighters locking the other in a submission and forcing the tap. So my lean in terms of betting value would probably be Damon Blackshear as the plus 185 underdog, but the fight to end via submission is also a good look. It's not not on DraftKings yet, but if it opens up and it opens at either even money or plus money, I think fight ends via sub is another good way to attack that fight. Up next, we're looking at Neil Magny taking on Ian Garry. Magny comes in as a huge underdog at plus 390, coming back on the Ian Garry side at minus 520. Listen, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this fight, and I didn't spend a whole lot of time on this fight before. I think Neil Magny is past his prime. I think Neil Magny is ever declining. He's declining, and that's why I played Phil Rowe as the underdog in their last fight, and it was a decision where a lot of people thought Phil Rowe could have got that decision. I feel like we were robbed in that fight a little bit, but I don't think Magny's going to beat Ian Garry, and I think Garry actually finishes Magny. But would I tell you to play a minus 520 on the money line? Absolutely not. I think you look at either the under 2.5 rounds at minus 130, which is a very good price tag when I consider that Ian Garry wins this fight and finishes Neil Magny, or you look at the slight plus money with Garry to win via KO or TKO at a plus 100. I think he has the much cleaner striking, the much better technical striking. I think he has way more durability at this point. I think Neil Magny is declining, like I already touched on, and I think this is an Ian Garry showcase spot. He's jumping in on short notice. Again, you know, it was originally set to be Jeff Neal versus Ian Garry, and I just think Garry runs through him here. So I like Garry via KO or TKO at plus 100, but I also like the under 2.5 rounds at a minus 130, and that's how I would attack the fight. But I do expect Garry to get an impressive TKO in this fight against the short notice replacement in Neil Magny. All right, and now we get to the co-main event for the Women's Strawweight Championship between the champion and Zhang Weili, who sits at a minus 310 on the money line, taking on Amanda Amandina Lemos at plus 250. Listen, if you listen to my breakdown before, I am going with the challenger in the big underdog in Amanda Lemos. I like Amanda Lemos to be too fast and too powerful with her boxing and be able to catch a fighter in Zhang Weili who has had defensive inefficiencies and who does leave her chin on the center line when she throws her striking combinations. She'll move her head off the center line if she's attacking with low kicks or potential kicks to the body, but if it's boxing exchanges and she's sitting in the pocket, she loves to trade with the opponent because she believes she has the speed advantage, you know, against most of the girls that she faces. I do think she might have a slight speed advantage against Lemos, but Lemos has a huge power advantage in this fight. I like the fight to go under 4.5 rounds at a minus 300. Now, that's something you would have to parlay, but I don't expect the fight to go the distance, whether it's Zhang Weili knocking out Amanda Lemos or taking her down using her grappling and submissions like we saw in her title-winning performance against Carla Esparza. I think it's either Amanda Lemos by knockout or Zhang Weili via submission. I am leaning with the underdog in Lemos at a plus 250 because I just think with the danger she possesses on the feet against the defensive inefficiencies of, you know, Zhang Weili when she gets into those exchanges, I do like the price tag on Lemos, but under 4.5 rounds would probably be your safest bet. I don't think this goes to decision, followed by the Lemos money line, and then I also like Lemos via knockout or TKO because if she wins this fight, she can lock up submission. She has a good ground game. We saw her showcase her grappling, her ground game, her positional awareness against Marina Rodriguez, and we also saw her use her submissions to submit Michelle Waterson with a guillotine choke. She's very strong, she's very powerful, she's a technical striker and a technical grappler, but I think if the fight ends via submission, that would more come from the side of Zhang Weili being able to tire out Lemos early in the fight and then eventually drown her in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th and probably get a sub at that point. But I like Lemos via knockout because, like I said, I think that's her best path to victory, and at a plus 450, that's a fight there, that's a line that I might play just on its own, you know, on Friday going into fight night on Saturday. I like Lemos via KO or TKO at plus 450. Another thing I think is a decent shot to look at is the alternative method of victory double chance on DraftKings that has Zhang Weili to win via submission or Amanda Lemos to win via knockout, TKO, or DQ. I expect that if Lemos wins this fight, it's her clipping or catching Zhang Weili with a big shot. Probably a big left hook would be most likely, and knocking out Zhang Weili. And if Weili wins this fight, although I think she can knock out Lemos, she's very powerful, she is very fast and technical in her own right. I think if Zhang Weili finishes this fight, it's more than likely going to be getting those takedowns, landing big ground and pound from the top, and locking up a submission on Lemos in those later rounds. That line for the alternative method of victory double chance sits at a plus 165. 165, and I like that if you're too worried about picking a side and you don't want to play the minus 310 on WEILI. I think if she wins this fight, it's with her grappling and jiu-jitsu, and I think if Lemos wins this fight, it's with her knockout upside and power in her boxing and kickboxing on the feet. So plus 165 for that line I think is a very, very good number. My favorite bet is Lemos on the money line, followed by Lemos via TKO at plus 450, followed by the alternative method of victory double chance with WEILI via sub or Lemos via knockout, and then that's at plus 165. And then my least favorite bet, just because of the price tag at this point, it wasn't this high earlier in the week. I think it was like minus 190, minus 200 earlier in the week for the under 4.5. And at minus 300, I think, yes, it is a good parlay piece because I don't expect it to go the distance, but I would never advocate for you to play a minus 300 in a single bet unless you're wagering around like $500 to $600. But it is what it is. But my pick is Amanda Lemos to walk out as the new champion and win the fight via a TKO. When it comes to the main event, obviously that's the last fight we have to break down with the Bantamweight Championship fight between the reigning champion and Aljamain the Funkmaster Sterling taking on Sugar Sean O'Malley, or should I say Sugar, the Sugar Show. One of the first people, or the first person who could win a championship coming off of Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series. So you know that the UFC wants Sean O'Malley to win. I don't think anybody would disagree that Dana White wants to wrap that belt around the rainbow-headed, Lucky Charms wearing Sugar Sean O'Malley, right? And I'm going to be honest, I'm picking him to win. I think that the odds are about where they should be. I think Aljamain should be almost a 3-1 favorite. But at the same time, I think that Sean O'Malley should be, he's plus 210, Aljamain Sterling minus 258. I think I'm going with Sean O'Malley, and here's why. Aljamain Sterling is going to be able to out-wrestle Sean O'Malley. We know that. And could he take him down immediately, close the distance, take his back, shuck him to the side, get the body triangle, jump on his back, and look for the rear naked choke and submit him? Yeah, he could do it in the first round. It could look very similar to the Corey Sandhagen and Aljamain Sterling fight, 100%. But I don't love the way that Aljamain Sterling closes the distance. And in going up against a fighter in Sean O'Malley, who's going to have that height, who's going to have that length, who's going to have that reach advantage to keep the opponent at a distance that Aljamain is going to have to walk through fire, if Sean O'Malley wasn't as big of a power puncher, if he didn't have the knockout ability, if he wasn't so creative with uppercuts, you know, feinting the uppercut to the cross like we saw against Eddie Wineland, feinting up the middle, then throwing a rear knee as the opponent changes levels like we saw him hurt Peter Yan with in that decision victory, then I would be a little bit more confident on the Aljamain Sterling side because we know he's going to have the wrestling. We know he's going to have the grappling. We know that if he gets the back of Sean O'Malley, it's a problem. But it's in the closing of the distance. It's in the heavy pressure and the walk forward style of Aljamain Sterling that he can walk onto some issues. Now, do I think he's better now than when he fought Marlon Moraes? Yes. But he's still a little bit wild. He's still a little bit reckless, using kicks, changing stances. I don't like the way he pulls away from punches. He doesn't necessarily have a high guard. He kind of just uses his length and reach to the best of his ability. But in going up against a longer, taller, rangier fighter in Sean O'Malley, I think that's a recipe for disaster. And I could see a very similar knockout to the Marlon Moraes knockout where he changed levels. He got caught with a switch kick, but it was more in need of the chin, and he got knocked out and he did the dab on the way down. I think we see a vicious knockout here from Sugar Sean O'Malley in this fight. And even if we don't, let's say Aljamain gets the takedowns, gets his back, you know, gets to the mount, works a submission, I think we could definitely see an Aljamain Sterling submission at the same time. So when it comes to my favorite plays, I like Sean O'Malley on the money line at a plus 210. I think it's definitely worth the shot. And if we're playing money line for money line, I think the Sean O'Malley side is the side to play all day because he has the one-punch knockout power. Yan has power in his hands, but he doesn't have knockout power. TJ Dillashaw does have knockout ability, but at the same time, that fight didn't even really get the chance to get started because TJ Dillashaw was a one-armed man. Henry Cejudo doesn't really have knockout power. The length, the reach, the distance, the creativity on the feet, and the one-hitter-quitter knockout ability O'Malley is going to make it very difficult for Aljamain Sterling to be able to close that distance, get into the clinch range, get into the takedowns and the wrestling without walking on to a big knee, to a big elbow, to a big 1-2, to a feint, to an uppercut as he changes levels. The strikes up the center channel, the front kicks, the teeps, the uppercuts, the feint uppercuts to the right hand, the 1-2s down the middle, the knees up the middle. Those are all going to be an issue for a guy who's going to be looking to close the distance, get in the clinch, get the takedown, and use his grappling and wrestling heavy strength and game plan to ground and pound or submit Sean O'Malley. And it definitely could go that way, but I'm leaning my favorite play to be Sean O'Malley on the money line at plus 210. I just think there's a lot of value there. When it comes to my second favorite play, I would say under 4.5 rounds. I think that this fight is not going to go to decision. It's either going to be Sean O'Malley knocking out Aljamain, or it's going to be Aljamain getting him to the floor, ground and pounding him, and eventually submitting him. So I would say the under 4.5 at minus 200 is my second favorite play. Up next, I would say if you're on the O'Malley side, you want to play by KO or TKO, which is at a plus 330. I think that if he wins this fight, that's how he wins. If you're on the Aljamain Sterling side, Aljamain Sterling side, I should say, then you're going to think that he wins the fight via submission, and Sterling via submission is at a plus 150. And then one final play I will give you is the alternative method of victory double chance with O'Malley via knockout or Sterling via submission, because I think we know that if O'Malley wins inside the distance, it's by KO. If Sterling wins inside the distance, it's via sub. This gives you exposure to both sides in a fight that nobody's really expecting to go the distance, and that's at a minus 175, and you have the most likely method of victory for either fighter. I think minus 175 for that line is a steal, and it's going to be a steal come the way the fight plays out on fight night. But that's going to be it for my betting leans for UFC 292. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, smash that like button with a Superman jab into a right low kick, so hit the subscribe button with a double leg takedown, and smash the notification bell with a spinning roundhouse, or a spinning wheel kick, I should say. I'm your host, Double M. Let's make some money this weekend at UFC 292.